Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast, where we talk with the people behind the current events and breakthroughs in brain implants in an understandable way, helping bring together various fields involved in neuroprosthetics. Here is your host, Laden Yurachek.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast. Today's guest is Craig Mermel, and he is President and Chief Product Officer at Precision Neuroscience, and they make minimally invasive brain implants for people with neurological conditions. Craig, pleasure to have you on the show. Do you want to introduce yourself better than I just did?
You did a great job. Thanks for having me on. My name is Craig Mermel. As you mentioned, I'm the President and Chief Product Officer at Precision Neuroscience. And by way of introduction to myself, I'm a relatively recent newcomer to the field of neural implants. By training, I'm a pathologist and a computational biologist. I've worked in computational problems in a number of healthcare fields and spent the last decade working in big technology companies, Apple and Google in particular. But I've joined in the last year and a half as Precision, joined from an early stage company to our current form.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. This podcast has been going on for a long time. We've interviewed 220 plus people. And I don't think I've talked to people who've worked at Google or Apple. I've seen that movie. I think it's called The Intern, where they have free bagels and a slide and everything like this. What color was your slide?
I think I had a blue slide.
So it sounds like a pretty sweet gig, but you decided to leave there, or what was the thinking behind that?
Yeah. So just to give a little bit of the history of Precision, Ben Rappaport, who I've known since 2004, we were medical school classmates. We actually interviewed on the same day at Harvard Medical School, and then classmates in the joint MD PhD program, anatomy lab partners, and then friends. I've known Ben for close to 20 years. Ben is the person who introduced me to the idea of a brain-computer interface and a neural implant. Ben is a trained neurosurgeon. He has a PhD in electrical engineering and has really spent his entire career focused on building clinically relevant brain-computer interfaces. Ben and Michael Mager, our CEO, decided to start Precision in 2020. They were kind enough at that point. I was having a pretty interesting time working in Google in their AI and artificial research for healthcare group. They invited me to join as a board member. So I was actually one of the founding board members of the company. And over the first year, watched Precision grow from an idea to a team with a technology platform that was incredibly exciting. I learned a ton about the industry over that year and was having so much fun and so passionate about the potential of the space that motivated me to leave my day job and join Precision in a full-time capacity at the beginning of this year.
Yeah. Wow. That must be pretty exciting to give up free bagels. Do you want to explain what Precision does and why it's not special?
Yeah, exactly. So I think, as you mentioned, we're a brain-computer interface company that is heavily focused on bringing the technical innovations that have really been in the field and pioneered over the last decade or 2 decades and bringing it into clinical practice. We have a particular point of view of the important components that enable us to deliver on this potential, namely the importance of minimally invasive surgical approaches that enable us to bring this technology from initial use cases into a broader patient population. But also importantly, we're focused on developing interfaces that are non-damaging to the brain and potentially reversible. We think this is incredibly important for enabling rapid adoption into clinical practice and ensuring that we can scale the bandwidth of these interfaces without causing irreversible damage to brain tissue. So that's the founding DNA of Precision. Ben, as a neurosurgeon and engineer, has been working in the space, founded Precision with those ideas and a number of different approaches. Over the course of the first year of the company, we settled on what's our first product approach and surgical delivery approach, which, as you mentioned, is based on thin film microelectrode array, cortical surface array technology, and a minimally invasive surgical approach we call a slit microosteotomy or slit insertion approach that enables us to access the cortical surface without removing a significant amount of bone in what's essentially a minimally invasive and percutaneous procedure. And it was those two innovations combined that really we got excited about and is the focus of our initial product development.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. I'm definitely reducing brain damage. And I heard that, and I've heard this disputed as well, but basically once the brain is exposed to oxygen, air, then it's just never the same. And I guess there are things that have gotten better since then. But yeah, basically making that incision point as small as possible is very important. Yeah.
It's important for a number of reasons. For the patient themselves, it changes the potential risk benefit. If you're talking to somebody has to have a massive craniotomy in order to have an implant placed, it might limit the attractiveness or the potential cost benefit. It's also better for the healthcare system. The cost and the time and the recovery from these procedures are significant. And so if we want to go beyond the initial patient population, it's really the whole range of neurologic conditions, from obviously very patients with quadriplegia or locked-in syndrome, but to larger and addressable populations, stroke and other types of neurologic injury, we felt it was important that you enable access to brain in a way that has a higher benefit to cost analysis for patients.
So the surgery it seems like it would be easier and faster and everything like this. Does that translate into cost as well? And what kind of, I don't know, recovery would a patient expect? Is it something like, could they go on their lunch break, or would they, instead of 8 months of recovery, they have 7.5? What's kind of the difference?
I should clarify that at this point, we're still a preclinical company. So I want to be careful about the claims we're going to make. Our intent and goal in the long run is to make this procedure as safe, rapid, and painless as possible. We do think that it should be possible in the first few years to make this essentially compatible with an outpatient type procedure where the patient would come in. Obviously, it would likely be done in an operating room, not in a mall somewhere, but in a surgical operating room, but where the patient could have the procedure and eventually be sent home after a quick observation period to recover.
Okay. And so how is this a company, I don't know, starting, you said you're preclinical, is it being funded with investors, grants, or what's kind of the strategy there?
Yeah, so we were founded with venture funding. We raised our Series A last year from a few institutional investors. That money went to hiring out the core team and building a first system. For those of your readers who are interested, we did publish a preprint that kind of describes both the array technology and the slit insertion on the bioRxiv earlier this year. We've really focused in the last year. The core concepts are present in that archive paper. Over the last year, though, we've spent a lot of time basically improving the system, professionalizing, going from a prototype stage into something that could actually be design locked and put into product. And we will be soon sharing sort of a peer-reviewed version of that manuscript. That includes a lot of validation in animal models, ensuring that the technology works, the insertion method is safe and reversible, and proving that the device can function for a number of different, both diagnostic and potentially neuroprosthetic type applications. We're making an exciting leap in the next few months and years. We actually, because our technology is based on cortical surface array technology, which, as I'm sure you and your listeners are aware, is a very old technology. It's been around for decades. That means there are predicates for the array component of our system itself. And so we're looking ahead to actually bringing through our first product through the FDA regulatory process in 2023, which is incredibly fast. We were founded in 2021 and we're already beginning our FDA testing for a submission in 2023. To be clear, this will not be a full neuroprosthetic device. This would be for a temporary implant that could be used for diagnostic applications like existing cortical surface array technology. But it's a really important step for us both as a company to go from an R&D stage into actually having a commercial and regulated product, as well as because we think this is an important step towards the eventual development of safe and effective neuroprosthetic technology.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting. But yeah, you mentioned that it is an old technology and it's been around for decades, and making a smaller slit also seems very logical. Why hasn't this been done before?
I think it's a combination of a few things. One, as there have been a lot of advances in thin film microfabrication technology, and at Precision, we're pushing very high resolution surface arrays, but that can be placed on flexible and conformable substrates. So the layer 7 device, which we're building, just to give you some of the sort of technical characteristics, has about 1,000 microelectrode arrays on a modular implant, each of which is about 1.5 centimeters square and is about 25 microns thick. That alone, and it enables us to combine it with a novel and proprietary insertion method, which we invented at Precision, to place those arrays onto the cortical surface through essentially a sub-millimeter thick insertion. And that technique itself required a number of sort of innovations on surgical approach, trajectory planning, as well as image guidance to enable us to do that safely and effectively. So I think it's the combination of thin film technologies and the slit insertion that enables us to think about deploying cortical surface arrays in a minimally invasive approach. We think that's incredibly important because, as your listeners may or may not know, most cortical surface array technologies are based on macroelectrode, thick, non-conformal silicone encapsulated electrodes that have to be placed through a craniotomy type procedure. So we think that a combination of both the nature of our thin film and the surgical innovations that we bring enable us to bring cortical surface array technology to patients in a minimally invasive fashion.
Yeah, that is pretty, I guess, revolutionary. I'm familiar with these kind of thin film electrode arrays is what I work with. And you could definitely get much smaller, I don't know, pitches between the electrodes compared to basically, yeah, like you said, in the silicone ones. It's almost, you could draw the same thing with a felt tip marker where those electrodes are. But with those thin film ones, it becomes impossible to do. And it's only possible through nanofabrication. And so that's what this cutting edge technology should be all about. I think that's pretty cool. Are you only looking looking to use these devices and methods for this indication, or are you looking to potentially partner with other people and maybe even license out this technology for other, I don't know, peripheral nerves or other parts of the brain or something like that?
No, I think it's a great question. Right now, we're, as a company, heavily focused on advancing brain-computer interface technology. So we see this first temporary implant as an important step in that roadmap. And we are building full stack, not just the array, but the associated electronics and software pieces to eventually drive neuroprosthetic control. That is our focus. I think you raise a really important point, which is there are both exciting research applications or adjacencies in the field of neural interfaces and a whole host of opportunities, partly by virtue of the fact that we're small and we need to be laser focused on what we can be good at. I think where we absolutely would consider partnering for some of these adjacent applications if it made sense for us and for the partner, but we haven't yet solidified any such partnership. But we're definitely open, especially to research collaborations from groups that are interested in using high density microelectrode arrays for interesting and novel applications.
Yeah, that's cool. Hey guys, just a quick pause to talk about our show sponsor, Iris Biomedical. Iris Biomedical provides a portfolio of neural sensing and simulation platforms and components to accelerate early-stage medical device companies through preclinical and early feasibility studies. Iris is an ideal partner for companies with limited budgets or resources to invest in developing a new platform from the ground up. Their experienced engineering team, in-house cleanroom facilities, and ISO 13485 certified quality management system allow for prototyping and early-stage commercial production. Be sure to tell them you heard about it on the Neural Implant Podcast. That'll really help us out. Thanks. Now, back to the show. When you were working at Google and Apple, I guess you were working on machine learning, healthcare, looking at diagnosing, treating cancers, basically through the Apple Watch. And that's pretty exciting stuff. So what's your role now in Precision? Are you also doing some kind of machine learning stuff there?
So obviously that was one of the first things I helped do. So I helped recruit and build out our software and machine learning capabilities and working first in our preclinical studies, helping to establish both our neural decoding and BCI type functionality in animal models. I'm also helping quite a bit with our academic collaborations as we look forward to early in human work. So those are the two core parts of my day job, as well as we're a startup. So we all have to wear many hats in our day-to-day jobs.
So also maybe mopping up the floors once in a while and
taking out the trash,
making the free bagels for the crew.
Exactly.
Yeah, cool. What are some of your biggest challenges right now?
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned, we're making this leap from an R&D stage company into one that's looking towards our first commercial product. With that, I think just comes a whole host of we've had to grow quite a bit. We've had to bring in new expertise, and we're looking ahead to just a whole host. I think the speed with which we have to pick up new capabilities, I think this is paralleled by the entire field. If we think about where the industry has been for a long time in sort of research settings, as we think about scaling into seeing these products make it into clinical practice, into commercial success, there's just a lot of activities and frankly, a lot of uncertainty as to how all of this is going to unfold. What are the clinical endpoints that are going to matter when it comes to getting brain-computer interface technology approved through the FDA regulatory process? How are payers going to think about reimbursing a brain-computer interface which doesn't currently exist? So those are some of the things we're starting to grapple with, is how do you really go from a promising technical system that works into a commercial product? And I don't think we're unique in that. I think all of our peers and folks have been in the space are working on similar challenges. I'd say that more than any particular engineering challenges is where I think a lot of the both challenging but exciting and important work ahead lies.
Yeah, a lot of times the engineering stuff is the most fun stuff, but then you got a lot of this financial and social and everything like this. Those are the real questions. And yeah, I really thank you for doing that kind of stuff, because you're going out there into the unknown, and it's almost like snowshoeing. The first person who's snowshoeing, like, they're expending all the energy. Everybody who comes after is like 1/3 the energy and money and everything like this.
Yeah, I think this is an area that, just to say, we have a lot of respect, and we hope to have good relationships with all of the other partners in the industry. We see ourselves as being all aligned in the common mission of bringing brain-computer interface technology from research settings into commercial success. We all have differences in terms of our approach and the way we're trying to tackle that problem, but ultimately a lot of these challenges are common, and we hope that by working potentially together and or sharing some of our learnings along the way, we can hopefully, one, ensure the industry succeeds, but most importantly, to make sure that patients have this technology available to them, and hopefully they have multiple options based on their particular clinical application and which device is going to be best. So I think that's the future we're all trying to build towards. Oftentimes we focus on the competitive pressures, but when you're having a new industry emerge, it's actually really important you identify those commonalities, put aside your competitive instincts for a second, and try to work together to advance a common cause.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think it definitely is best to give the patient a few choices and make this kind of available. And then competition spurs improvements, everything like this, and monopolies stagnate the products and everything like this. I'm seeing that you guys raised $12 million for your Series A. That seems like a lot. Is that good? If it was more, if you had 10 times more, would you guys be able to go faster? Or if you had 10 times less, would it take longer? I'm curious about this number.
Yeah, it is a lot of money, but for medical technology, there's a lot of expenses that accrue as you go along. We've gotten very far on that money and built our team and in the core system, and we expect that to take us quite a way towards our first FDA approval. We'll obviously need more capital in the future to both go faster and to get to the ultimate end goal of building a brain-computer interface. I think your question in it is what's important isn't to have unlimited capital, but enough based on what are the key challenges at each stage. I think that actually, not to have a contrarian view, obviously most entrepreneurs are always focused on, do I have enough money? How do I get more money to fund my growth? Conversely, having 10 times the amount of money at an early stage before you actually solve some of the key problems can be a problem because it actually it pushes off some of the hard questions you have to ask yourself. We talked about this a little earlier. There's a lot of really exciting opportunities in the space. And if you have a lot of money, sometimes your tendency is to just spread your bets across many different things. And with that comes a lack of focus and a lack of execution. So, we're fortunate to have really great investors who've backed us to this point. We also are very proud that we've remained focused on advancing the clinical state of the art in the field and moving rapidly towards our first FDA approval and first patients. That's a skill that I don't think having more money isn't going to necessarily compress every piece of that timeline. It's just certain timelines that it takes to get through certain steps, and money can help a little bit, obviously hiring good talent and allowing you to parallelize certain things, but it won't dramatically speed it up. And actually focusing on the right problems and being selective of where you want to make an impact is probably the most important thing for a company at our stage.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, at some point you can throw more money at it, and you're right. It makes one stupider, even, or the true person comes out potentially. There's also NIH has a lot of programs that are like grants. There's all these kind of grants possible and everything like this. Why did you choose this dilutive versus non-dilutive route?
I think there's a few things. One is just timing and the institutional route. If you can find investors is often faster and sometimes less. Both, it forces accountability, which is good. Like I said, if your goal is to make rapid progress and there's just fewer hurdles to get through to get that funding, we're absolutely open to pursuing these types of non-dilutive funding. We just haven't had the perfect opportunity that came up yet. And fortunately, we haven't been stalled for lack of non-dilutive funding.
Yeah, for sure. I heard it can be distracting as well. Like you have to be thrust into a different direction, and it's not ultimately where you want to go.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's great uses for that technology. I think that the truth, if your goal is to advance commercial technology and you can find private investors to fund that, then that has advantages as well. Those processes can move faster and you can be a little bit less constrained in terms of exactly how you deploy the capital.
Yeah. So I know you're not in the field necessarily, so maybe you don't have like such strongly held opinions or something like this, but what's a mistake or wrong direction that you see others going down that maybe you guys have changed in, or that you guys are avoiding in Precision? So what's some best practices or common traps to avoid?
That's a good question. I think we've mentioned I think the whole point of Ben founding Precision was based on this belief that, commitment to damaging and irreversible interfaces was a mistake, both from a fundamental level that, what may work well in the bandwidths of hundreds to thousands of electrodes, as you think about the future, we're thinking ahead to the future where you have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of interfaces. The amount of damage you do will become a limiting factor at some point. I think that's not unique to Precision, but I think that's a core, strongly held belief and something that's really guided our thinking in the space. What does that translate into? I think the fact that we can advance through the preclinical into clinical stages of our company very quickly is a direct outgrowth of that. There are regulatory pathways available for devices that can be placed in the brain and then removed and be considered reversible that aren't available to you if you're working on a penetrating electrode or non-reversible implant. So I think we see that as not secret sauce, but core to our speed and velocity as a company, and something we wouldn't trade. I think otherwise, I think some of the things we generically mentioned, which I think applies in this space as well as others, is you have to be really good at picking the problems that you do solve. We at Precision, since our goal is on clinical impact, we're trying to, and we're scientists at heart, so we love science. We're trying to do the least amount of original science as possible, building on what's already been done, and really taking the problems that we see as being blockers of taking the amazing work that's been done and translating that into clinical practice. That's the part of the problem that we're trying to be good at. So it actually means remaining disciplined and not getting excited by a lot of really cool and really interesting and really important work, but that isn't actually core to your mission and reason for existing. So I think remaining true to that is just, that applies in neural interfaces as well as in any other industry or problem I've worked on. It's a bit of the Apple culture where Apple would say 1,000 no's for every yes. Steve Jobs famously said he was proudest of the things that Apple didn't work on than the things they did, because that's what enabled you to succeed. So I think that's a bit of that DNA and how we think about these problems.
That is actually really cool. Yeah. And that's something that's definitely a theme that I'm hearing is focus and not getting distracted, both in terms of taking this dilutive funding, even though it's seemingly like a lot, spending that wisely and focusing only on one thing. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. And then you mentioned your history at Apple. So I'm curious, I guess I'm curious about maybe a deeper dive into your history, and then maybe what you might suggest for others. And maybe they also want to work at FANG company and then go into neurotech. And I don't know, what would you recommend in that case?
I think for this listeners, everyone should obviously stay in neurotech and not work in big tech companies. No, I have a very unusual path. The short version of the story was I was, as I mentioned, MD PhD and trained in computational biology. I did my PhD in cancer genomics and then trained clinically as a pathologist at Mass General. Ben and I actually share this kind of common, we're technology optimists. And so throughout our friendship and career, we've had a number of different collaborations. The thing that brought me to the Bay Area was in about 2009, we got very interested in wearable technologies as the next frontier of where we saw a lot of potential for digitizing aspects of behavior and physiology. It was clear already there were Fitbits and other devices that were getting developed. They were going to collect a lot of data about how people moved and how they were feeling or what types of physiologic signals. And we said, well, wouldn't it be interesting to try to work on novel health insights that you could glean from these types of devices? I think we were a little ahead of our time. Fortunately, we were slowed down by the fact that we were both residents and medical students, so we didn't have full time to devote to this. But we started a company based on this in 2012. And after 2 years, that company, we had some IP and we sold that company to Apple, which ultimately we helped embed some of our work into the Apple Watch. And that's how I went from being a pathology resident into big tech. And after being a big tech, I think I've had a whole separate podcast worth of experiences. I've been incredibly fortunate to get to work with some incredibly talented and interesting people on problems that I never dreamed I would be working on. But I think it's been really exciting to see how an idea we had in 2009 is actually now there are not just one technology. Apple obviously has a few FDA clearances for diagnostic sensors. There are companies in the neural space, I think companies like Rune Lab are getting their own FDA clearances for algorithms that you can build for tracking Parkinson's, tremors, and medication-related dyskinesia. So this is real. And I think that space is just beginning to emerge. Precision is now the next wave of, instead of just wearable technology, we're implanting it in people, and all the advances that enable, we really believe that the next decade will be driven by neural interfaces. And just part of the motivation, obviously Ben has seen this and worked his whole career on it, but part of what really got me excited is we're not talking about improving therapies that exist 10%. We're talking about diseases that have been considered and still are to this day largely untreatable, and bringing new technology. So I think there's very rarely a time to work on really important and interesting technical problems, but that also have the potential for just massive human and clinical impact. And that's what gets me up every day, to be excited, to just love and be so passionate about what I'm doing at Precision. That's my general piece of advice for your listeners, is work on something that you feel like, every project and job, and from my work in PhD to the work I did at big tech, has its own unique challenges. Everyone from the outside focuses on the really exciting and glamorous aspects of that. once you're on the inside, the glamorous aspects become less glamorous and you're stuck with the unique challenges. What gets you through that is your belief that you're working on something that has meaning outside of the particular perks. And I think when you have those opportunities, whatever that may be, you should take it. And I guess just the last piece for folks that are not as, who maybe didn't have a background and are thinking about coming into the space. Two things. Ben, when I talked about coming, Ben and I talked a lot about this of how could I get up to speed on an entire field. And Ben told me two things. One, everyone has a particular viewpoint and expertise, and there's actually a lot of benefit in the beginner's mind because while you're new and you don't know as much, you also have a unique perspective to bring. And that's important, especially when we think about all the people that have been in the industry versus where it needs to be. We're going to need to grow it massively. So everyone's going to, in 10 years, 85% of this industry will be new to the field today. So don't let that be a deterrent to joining. And second, like when we talked about it, the needs are going to change, right? And there's so many different ways to have an impact in this field, from the fundamental neuroscience and electronics to software and machine learning and data science, which is the angle I came into, regulatory expertise to commercial. I think that for folks who are drawn to this field, find the way that you can bring value and let that be your entry point to what's an amazing and I think super important industry.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. You're right. Like at some point, I guess the novelty of free bagels wears off.
Don't get me wrong. Both Apple and Google that I worked at are amazing places to work. The best, by far, best aspect of working there, 100%, is the people you get to work with. The fact that you're working with just top-notch people in every area. The food, the massages, the famous perks, some of which I think are going away, and certainly in COVID and then in this economic environment. Those are nice, but they quickly become just a background part of the job, and those alone won't keep you there, right? I would much rather buy my own bagel and work on a problem, brain computer interfaces, than keep the free bagels and not be working on something that I'm incredibly passionately excited about.
Yeah, that's really cool. This is something that I experienced when I was in Palo Alto visiting my friend. And it really felt like even you go into Phil's Coffee and you run into really smart people and everybody's just really like top of their field and everything like this. What's it like doing that, working in Apple and Google and working in a startup? Can you compare that? And would you maybe recommend even having some of that talent rub off on you in the beginning, like in your early stage of the career, or so maybe get smarter? Or what do you think?
Yeah, look, I would say no matter what you do, try to work with the best people you can in that space because they'll make you better at whatever it is. I started with a startup and then went to some of the largest companies, and now I'm back to the startup. The biggest advantage of a startup has goes back to the point. Any project at Apple and Google was immaterial to the success of, unless you're working on the core iPhone or at Apple or Google search at Google. Everything we were doing in health or other types of things was a luxury. And the problem with that it was very hard to sustain the focus and attention of the company when that hit hard points, which every technology inevitably does. A startup's survival depends on that thing. And that's an incredibly good forcing function. We have no choice but to succeed in our mission as a team because we won't be around if we don't. And I think that's something that you can really only get with a small thing. The advice I generally give, and this is just a heuristic, is if you want to learn skills, broadly applicable skills, working at a big company that's been successful is a great way to do that. If you want to solve a problem, it's definitely a harder road, but if you can find smart, motivated people who think like you, join that team and work on that problem. And I think that's and like my career shows, it's not like you have many opportunities. So you may start at a small company and find yourself acquired or eventually turning into a big company, or you can do the opposite. It's all about being honest and reflective with yourself of what's important to you at each stage in your career.
Wow. Yeah, I really like that. That's a very interesting way to put it. And yeah, I think this is great advice. Craig, I think this has been great. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to mention?
No, I think thank you for having us on. Just to reiterate, we're at Precision really excited about the potential and the role we potentially have to play. And we look forward to sharing more about what we're doing. Hopefully there's a way if your readers are interested in contact me, we can share some of our information in the podcast so they can get in touch.
Excellent. Yeah, I can include whatever email you want or whatever in the show notes. So
okay, we'll include my email and then maybe our preprint in the show notes would be a great way to kind of introduce Precision.
Okay, sounds good. Okay. Thank you so much.
And the website, we just actually relaunched. Thanks. We just relaunched our website, so that's also we'll put the website in the
It's
show.
a nice website. It's pretty fancy.
Thank you. It was pretty bare bones for a while on purpose, but as we get ready, we're coming out and telling people about what we're doing.
That's awesome. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed the show and were able to learn something new, bringing together different fields in novel ways. Until next time on the Neural Implant Podcast.